Okay, this is chapter 16 of Zodiac, Donald Jeff Andrews. Wednesday, August 9th, 1978. I can tell you who Zodiac is, said the anonymous voice on my phone on the evening of August 9th, 1978. He's so full of movies, he has a record of his activities on film. Jack Rosenbaum in the San Francisco Progress had mentioned I was investigating the Zodiac case. The caller got my name from that. The caller refused to give me his name, but agreed to my taping our conversation. He went on with his story. I have a mutual friend, Greg, who is a ham radio operator who talked to this man at night. He's a guy named Don Andrews. Both names have been changed. Back in 1969, he was coming out of a period of deep depression. Well, if there's anyone who could be the Zodiac, then it is this fellow, Andrews. My friend Greg told me about him, and I told him he was all wet. But as the years have unfolded, we keep finding out things about Andrews that fit, nothing that doesn't. The caller then told me that Andrews was the man Narlo in Napa was interested in. I don't know why Narlo has held back. I'm convinced that he doesn't know what to do. Narlo spent 6 hours with Andrews one day. Don just called a mile a minute. Narlo told me he had me so confused I couldn't even write a report when it was over. This guy takes over when you're around him and talks. He's not in bad health. I've seen him since 72, but his eyesight is poor. I wouldn't be afraid of him. I'm 6'3". He would be more terrorizing than physically threatening. His mind would scare you more than his physical strength. At an early job, he was let go because he couldn't get along with people. He had access to the weather teletype there. I don't know why he got interested in weather. Narlo keeps Don's file locked in his desk. All the other suspects out in the open in other places. He relates strongly to Lon Chaney. He's got kind of a rounded back like the Hunchback. One person, Marvin Barnell, not his real name, has spent a lot of time with Don. He's storing some old film cans for Andrews, and that's where we think the evidence of the Zodiac murders is at. Does Barnell know this? I asked. No, he thinks he's just storing a bunch of old film cans, 35mm. Don told him, Don't go close to these. They've got nitrate film in them. They might explode, which is true. We had seen these canisters at the theater that Barnell runs. The next time Greg and I went down, we found they were gone and then discovered that they had been moved to a vault behind red curtains in Barnell's home. Do you understand? What we think is that there is evidence from each particular murder and no one can have a booby trap with an explosive if you open it. And one can have a booby trap with an explosive if you open it up. Get to Barnell and be friendly with him to find out. I have some misgivings about him. He's an ex-cop. Probably he suspects nothing. Talk to him. See if he tells you to stay away from part of his film collection. He hauls film back and forth for Don. Andrews lived in Scott Street in San Francisco in the late 60s. I learned that Paul Avery had been on to Don Andrews and at one point had sent his girlfriend around to get handwriting samples. Andrew heard that Avery had been asking around about him and actually had come down to the Chronicle to tell him to lay off. The samples Avery had, only 3 or 4 words, did not look like Zodiac printing, but with my new knowledge I realized this did not eliminate Don as a suspect. Takashi knows about him, the caller told me. Takashi cleared him because when he went to Don's home there was a grisly hand-printed sign in the window and it didn't match Zodiac's printing. Takashi thought it was a big joke. The caller told me that Don was raised by a stepmother, his father was very religious, and there were family problems. The caller spoke with me long distance for over an hour. He read to me from notes. I could hear the pages as he turned them. The most promising thing I heard was that he had a 30 by 40-inch felt-tip pen movie poster that Don had done for his friend Barnell. After he hung up, I thought for a while. He had known a little too much about the case, and he had called me at an unlisted number. Saturday, August 26, 1978. I went to visit Sherwood Morrill in the sweltering heat of Sacramento. A vigorous man clad in a sports t-shirt, he settled back in an easy chair while I turned on my tape recorder and asked him a few questions. After a while, he asked me to turn off the machine. He wanted to tell me something that happened last month, and it was something he didn't want on tape at this time. A big guy and his wife in a VW drove up, he said, and asked my wife Rose if they could see me. I'm real interested in the Zodiac case. I've got some news for Mr. Morrell, said the man. That will make him and me sleep better. I'm only a citizen. I spent a great deal of time coming down from Yountville. It's about that letter. I know it's from Zodiac and not Takashi. Well, I was at lunch with Dave DeGuillermo, another handwriting identification expert. He's with the public defender's office now. The couple seemed greatly agitated, and Rose told them that I wouldn't be back from lunch until 2:30, and they said they would wait. When I got back, continued Morrill, he and his wife both came in. He said his name was Wallace Penny. The name of this person has been altered at his request. His hands were shaking. He's nervous as all hell. He tried to taunt me every time I mentioned something about Zodiac. He says, "Wait till you hear this." He had a great big theory. "I'll only take 5 minutes of your time," he said. He took an hour and a half. He told me Mr. Takashi would sleep better tonight, and then he told me the name of the man he thought was really the Zodiac. At this point, I stopped Morrill and asked him if he would tell me the name of the suspect. He began the name and I finished it for him. "My God," I said, "that's the name of my suspect, Don Andrews." It was also the name of Ken Narlow's mystery suspect. The handwriting samples the couple brought Morrill matched up pretty well with Zodiac printing, with the exception of the letter K. The couple knew many details only the killer should have known. Morrill told his wife after they'd left, "If Donna Andrews isn't the Zodiac, then it could be them." Rose Morrill had shivered, looked at her husband, and whispered, "You might have just shaken hands with the Zodiac." "And you know, Robert," said Morrill, "I had the feeling that the man wanted to confess to something." Tuesday, August 29th, 1978. I drove to Vallejo to speak with Lieutenant Jim Hustad, head of the intelligence section of VPD. He was excited about the possible return of Zodiac and promised to show me 2 of their suspects. Hustad took a file out of a metal cabinet behind his desk. He began to tell me things about this first suspect, his interest in films, his code school training, the usual items kept in his home. This man was given a speeding ticket in his white Chevy at Tahoe at the time Donna last disappeared, he told me. I recognized the man as Andy Todd Walker, the first major Zodiac suspect. Friday, August 25th, 1978. By phone, I spoke to Wallace Penny, the man from Youthville who had so upset Morrill on July 5th. I instantly recognized his voice. He was the same man who had tipped me off anonymously about Ken Narlow's suspect, Don Andrews. What I learned from Penny was that Andrews was nervous, frantic, and temperamental and often exhibited hostility towards sex. However, he seemed to have had a female friend. He's a Gilbert and Sullivan fan and has quoted lyrics in front of friends, Penny said. Not only had Andrews been code training, but he had a sewing machine in his home. Was this the answer to where Zodiac was able to get a personalized black hood? Penny told me that Andrews had showed him blueprints for Zodiac's 1969 school bus bomb based on plans in a book he owned. The Zodiac bomb plans were never printed anywhere. Donna Andrews collects classic films, said Penny. The cross-circle symbol of the Zodiac could be inspired by the projectionist symbol on the film leader. Don is ambidextrous. He has told his friends, "I may look okay on the outside, but inside." This parallels Zodiac's statement, "I'm insane, but the game must go on," Penny told me. Zodiac and Andrews both wear glasses that are held on by a band. According to Penny, Andrews has been known to confide to his friends, "What I have is better than sex." Not only that, Penny continued, Andrews has used so many names that Social Security asked that he settle on one. Andrews started for Montana in 1961 with a teenager named Jim to apply for a new birth certificate. When he reached Montana, he put his name down on the certificate as Jim Andrews. Andrews was the only suspect who had any sort of elaborate photo darkroom. He kept a teletype machine in his home. Teletype paper had been used in the first Zodiac letter. I remembered what Ken Narlow, the Napa detective, had told me. "I've got a Lulu on Don." Down in his basement, he has a teletype machine, a Model 15 AP teleprinter. I tell you, Robert, there's no question in my mind that whoever drew up the article on the bomb, Zodiac's November 1969 school bus bomb diagram, has got to have definite knowledge of that teletype printer. Narlow had shown me the comparison between a photo of the teletype machine's armature rotation system and brush contacts and the killer's schematic drawing of the explosive device. Zodiac's costume combined naval elements such as bell-bottom pants, military shoes, and nylon windbreaker. Andrews was a Navy man. 1 month before the first Zodiac letter done in handprinting, Andrews began a friendship with a man named Marvin Barnell. After Andrews and Barnell met, the Zodiac messages were printed in a style of handprinting very similar to that Barnell used in printing black felt-tip movie posters at his theater. Perhaps Andrews had copied Barnell's style. Once again, Penny mentioned that he and his friend Greg thought that evidence of the Zodiac killings was in a film canister in Barnell's film vault. Stein's shirt, set of car keys, and maybe a film of the Lake Herman Road murders are in that film can. It's marked clearly on the side, "Do not open, nitrate film, danger." Penny said he had seen the canister when it was in San Francisco. Perhaps the police had not checked it because Barnell had moved to Southern California, where he had a theater. Saturday, August 26, 1978. I drove to Andrew's place. No sooner had I gotten to Don's mailbox than a big man came running over shouting, "What do you want?" "I was looking for Don," I said, although it was obvious no one was living there now. "He's not here, he's in San Francisco." "Damn," I said, reaching for a pen. "What's his new address?" "If you're a friend, find out his address." The guy stood there with his hands on his hips until I drove off. I got the feeling I had been expected. Even though Narlow was unable to establish any sort of proficiency with weapons as far as Don Andrews was concerned, he had told me that Don is still my best bet. I had asked him about the prints. We had his prints checked. We never brought him in, actually, never asked to roll his prints. We never had enough cause to do it, and I'm not sure he would have consented. He might have. The more we started leaning on him, the more naturally defensive he got. The first couple of times we talked to him, he was very open. Then it got to the point where he said, "Either do something or leave me alone." The first time we went to his house over by the water, we were there several hours. Very intelligent person, very interesting person. He didn't seem to mind talking about his past. Monday, August 28, 1978. Penny had told me that Don Andrews was full of movies and had once worked at a small cinema in Southern California with his friend Marvin Bernelli. Bernelli had once been a silent movie organist. Their friendship had lasted from early 1967 until the present. Penny had never gotten up enough nerve to approach Bernal and find out if he knew any information about Zodiac or linked to the Vintage Film Theater. It was night when I arrived in LA. I took a rental car from the airport to the theater on North Highlands Avenue to see if Barnell was anywhere around. There were no silent films tonight, but Barnell was at the cinema to see part of the 3D movie being shown. Even in the blackness of the lounge seats, I could pick out Barnell from the front row. Because of the black leather jumpsuit he wore, he seemed to have no body. He reminded me of the giant head of Oz floating in midair. I went up to him during intermission and started up a conversation. He began to talk a mile a minute with bold, flourishing gestures. An almost Barrymore profile made him one with the old films he had once accompanied on his giant Wurlitzer pipe organ. He was a portly man with a face that, in his 60s, was beginning to grow fat. He had an eye problem, and in order to write his home address, he had to put on his dark-rimmed glasses. "I can't see without glasses," he said. "I'm going to be on vacation and do a little business, but I'll be back in September." Friday, September 1st, 1978. I made the drive to Sacramento to speak with Morrill about the comparisons between Don Andrews and Zodiac. "Well," said Morrill, "I've talked about Don Andrews with the guy who's the chief special agent of CINI, and I mentioned some of the stuff you told me." Takashi said, "Armstrong checked these two guys out, Andrews and Wallace Penny." "I don't know how he checked them out," Dave said. "Do whatever you want with it," said Morrill. "I think he thinks very highly of you, incidentally. The poor guy. Before I got through talking to him, he started crying, and I felt really bad that I even brought the subject up at all." Penny laid everything on Andrews. "Like I told you, I thought for a while after he left that night that maybe he was Don Andrews. Dave tells me they checked it out, and they are two different people." Then Penny kept talking about this third party that's in the middle. "That would be Barnell, Andrews' friend," I said. "He never mentioned his name to me, though. I've never seen any of his handprinting, and I've never seen any of Penny's handprinting. I wrote to him in hopes that he would answer. I tried to butter him up," said Morrill. "Now Dave DeGuillermo, my associate, He's got some contacts over in Marin County and Sonoma County. He's trying to find something out on Don Andrews. So far, nothing. Penny did leave me some of Andrew's handprinting on a poster, though. I'll get it out in a minute. You know, Robert, if Zodiac is ambidextrous, it would account for the difference in slant, or in the case of transparencies, in copying it word for word from somebody else's stuff. When he does the straight up and down stuff, I agree, they're either tracing or transparencies, said Morell. Penny has had his suspicions about Don Andrews for 5-6 years, I said, and hasn't done anything about it, so I'm going to be seeing the organist in Southern California, and we'll see what he does. San Francisco doesn't seem to have anything. Well, Tedesco, Takashi's replacement, called the other night to see if I would look at all the letters. I'm off the case. You can tell Mr. Gain I'm not going to look at anything for San Francisco PD anymore, I told him. Tedesco kind of laughed nervously and said, I think I understand your view. Morell took out the photo Penny had brought as a sample of Don Andrews' printing. It was a hand-drawn movie poster done in black felt-tip pen. That's beautiful, I said. Some of the things don't quite match in this exemplar, but enough of them do to make you wonder an awful lot. I asked Morell if he had any theories of his own. Yeah, do you suppose, Robert, that there may be more than one guy involved? Now I'm thinking about Wallace Penny and Don Andrews. Penny's sure strong enough, 6'4" and 240. Suppose one of them is doing the writing and the other's doing the killing. Outside of the letters, he continued, what evidence do the police have? They're grasping at straws. The day Wallace Penny showed up at my house to tell me about Don Andrews, I sat down with my wife Rose and talked with her about the Zodiac case. I didn't realize until Penny left that he knew too much about things that the police have never revealed. I'm not sure I didn't have the Zodiac sitting right here in the room with me and didn't know it, didn't realize it. I've started up to go see him at his carpentry shop a couple of times, I said, but I've canceled out every time. I just get a weird feeling about driving up there. Robert, you better be careful, cautioned Morell. I'm not worried about him doing anything to me, but I'm real worried about his motives in the Zodiac case. There could be some danger for you. I wouldn't get alone with the guy. Penny has the wildest theory in the world, I said. He thinks that Andrews made a film of one of his murders and has put it in a film canister booby-trapped to explode and destroy the evidence. Ha, I hadn't heard that one. The thing you're going to have to find for me, Robert, is some more handprinting. Don Andrews, Penny's, and Andrews' friend Burnell. Let's check them all. Don Andrews particularly. I sure would like to know what Armstrong did to clear Andrews. I don't know unless a fingerprint didn't match, said Morell. I always thought Armstrong was real intelligent. He and Takashi made a heck of a good pair. I was told Ken Narlow went down after the last Zodiac letter and talked to Andrews. Andrews immediately had his phone disconnected. It's a strange reaction, I said. Narlow talked to him for 6 hours, and he went away with his head spinning. When I got back to San Francisco, there was a letter in my mailbox from Marvin Burnell agreeing to a meeting at his home on the 13th. When I saw Burnell's handprinting, I realized it was he who had drawn the movie poster that Penny had given to Morell as a sample of Don's printing. Wednesday, September 13th, 1978. I met with Burnell in the evening at his home near Riverside. He showed me into a large old-fashioned living room. Somehow Burnell knew I had come to talk to him about more than his silent film collection. Perhaps his old friend, the elusive Don Andrews, had seen several newspaper articles that mentioned a book on Zodiac that I was writing. If Don had warned his friend not to say too much to me, did he feel there was some sort of connection between himself and the search for Zodiac? Burnell sat on the couch to my right. I asked him a few questions about the strange link between Zodiac himself and the movies. To be honest, I said, when I got your letter from L.A. and I saw handprinting at the bottom, I was really startled. It's amazingly similar to the printing done on the Zodiac letters. I looked at him intently, trying to gauge his reaction, but he remained impassive. I changed the subject. Zodiac made several allusions to films in his letters to the papers. For instance, Zodiac mentions The Most Dangerous Game. Did that film ever play at your theater? Oh, heavens, yes, Burnell thrilled. I don't know how many times. Did you show it around 1968 to 69? I started it with the theater about 69, he acknowledged, and Dangerous Game could have come in, but it's been there much more than twice because it's a classic of its kind. Marvin, Zodiac mentioned the most dangerous game in his 3-part cipher and then went on to attack 2 people at Lake Berryessa wearing a costume with a hood and carrying a knife that was a duplicate to the one that Count Zeroff wore in the movie. I feel that Zodiac may have modeled his knife and his costume to a certain extent after that movie. 2. In one of Zodiac's letters, he mentioned the Red Phantom. I've learned recently that there was a silent film called El Spectre Rojo, an early Path Fairs film. I have a copy of it, said Barnell guardedly, leaning forward. Did Zodiac mention that? He used that as a pen name. Burnell laughed nervously, covering his teeth with a white hand. That's pretty funny, because we had a Zodiac ceiling in our old theater in L.A., he said. A lot of people don't even notice it. Their eyes are more concentrated down front on the screen. He paused. Now let's see. El Spectre Rojo is a silent film, but I don't know how he could have known about it. It was considered a lost film until someone from Thunderbird Films found the original hand-tinted print. Its first announcement of sale was... He thought for a moment. I could do a little digging. Zodiac's letter mentioned the Phantom in 1974, I said. Well, that would be about right. I first saw the film then and decided to buy a 16mm copy when it was shown at the annual Film Collectors Convention in Canada. I pointed out to him that in one of the killer's letters he mentioned the piano organist. Burnell had once been a silent film organist. Then there's his symbol, I continued. The cross circle. Isn't that the same symbol used on a film leader when they count down? Yeah, you'll find that symbol on the leader beginning a film. Of course, I said. The police have always thought of it as a rifle sight. No, when I saw it in the paper, I recognized it as an Academy Standard letter. To help sustain the house, I've been running commercial films, recent films instead of the classics. Not a very good deal, but we get a modest turnout. I do everything, do the posters too, but I will not leave my more elaborate posters around the theater. Too much chance of damage. On the other hand, these flimsy things, Burnell gestured with an outstretched hand toward the poster blow-up that Wallace Penny had offered as a sample of Don Andrews' printing. Such as you have a copy of there is no particular point of preserving those. They're just wadded up and thrown out after the show. Then you are the one who printed this poster? We'd been under the impression that a man named Don Andrews... I paused. He used to work for you, I believe. He has, said Barnell stiffly. The police, in checking him out as a Zodiac suspect, thought the posters were done by him. They used this copy of a movie poster as his handwriting sample. I showed Burnell photographic enlargements of the letters, pointing out certain areas where they resembled the poster. Do you have a sample of Don's real handprinting? I don't have any letters from him, he said softly. I don't have any occasion to have any correspondence with him anymore. My guess is that Zodiac was influenced by the handprinting of one of your movie posters, I told him. I think he saw the posters you did in black felt tip pen and discarded and photographed the letters to trace onto his communications to the press. Burnell had been very nervous, but after he brought back his film records, along with coffee and chocolate cake, we checked the projection dates for The Most Dangerous Game and learned it had last played in May 1969. Burnell was a charming, friendly man and not threatening in any way, but I sensed there was a lot he was not telling me. Alone with him in this old house, I had the feeling that any moment a stocky man in a black hood could step into the room holding a pistol. After all, no one knew where Don Andrews was. Finally, I went down to the basement with Burnell to see his impressive collection of films. It covered one wall and part of another. I looked at the canisters, wondering if what Wallace Penny had told me was true, that Zodiac had hidden evidence from one of the killings in a film of the Lake Herman murders in a 35mm film canister marked "Do Not Open Nitrate Film Danger," and that he had given this to Burnell to keep for him in case his room was ever searched by the police. Burnell steered me away from the films after he noticed the intense way I was looking at the canisters. He led me over to where he lettered his movie posters. The felt-tip pen printing looked like enlargements of the Zodiac handprinting. If there was a booby-trapped film canister, I tried to imagine what an explosion could do to a ramshackle 3-story frame house like this. Decaying nitrate film was, after all, TNT. Once again, Burnell assured me we were completely alone, but I could hear, faintly but unmistakably, the slow, methodical, easy tread of footsteps on the floor above. I pretended not to notice. I wasn't too worried. My friends knew where I was, and all the information I learned about Andrews I had given to Lieutenant Hustad in Valito. I met a second time with Burnell to discuss his friend's possible connection with Zodiac. I heard that Zodiac may have hidden evidence of his crimes in a silent film canister rigged to explode if opened, I said, and left this with an unknowing friend. The organist's broad smile vanished. He flushed, looked embarrassed, and when his smile came back, it was in such a way that his lips pulled back over his gums, completely exposing his teeth. I thought to myself that perhaps in the past Burnell had been asked to keep such a canister by his friend, and now he suspected he may have been used. I described the label. Don has given me such a canister marked as you say, he said. Wallace Penny had been right. Such a film canister existed. I tried to look calm, although my pulse rate was accelerating by the second. Do you know where it is now? I asked. He took it back. 1972, I think it was. Damn, if Don Andrews was Zodiac, no one would ever see that canister again. Burnell was staring at the floor. He was terribly worried about the handprinting connection between himself and the Zodiac letters. Are you ambidextrous? I asked. No, he said. I'm right-handed. Then you don't have anything to worry about. Zodiac's ambidextrous. Burnell looked like I had hit him between the eyes with a hammer. Don uses his left hand when he cuts films, Burnell said. Writes with his right. I guess he's ambidextrous. This was a fact about Don I had known long before I came to Riverside. The look on Burnell's face convinced me that he knew nothing about his friend's possible connection with the murders. Burnell told me Don Andrews had left San Francisco in 1975 and had been out of state until the beginning of 1978. This might account for the long delay in letters and the phrase, I am back with you. I asked Burnell if Andrews was back in San Francisco. Burnell thought for a moment, walked across the room, and stood with his back to me in front of the fireplace. He said he wasn't sure. Tuesday, September 19th, 1978. I had been receiving breathing phone calls at work for some time. They almost always came at 10:30 a.m. This evening, I called Burnell at his Riverside home to ask him some more questions about his friend. Marvin, I've never seen Don, I said. If I read you this description, would you tell me where it's wrong? I asked. Well, I'll try it, okay, I said. He's a white male adult, stocky, heavy set, about 5'8" tall. He has a slightly rounded back, has a paunch, and in '69 he had crew-cut hair that was slightly curled with sort of a reddish tint. He would be about 35. He wears black-rimmed glasses, and he holds them in place with a thin band of elastic. He's rather barrel-chested, sort of beefy but firm. Well, he is chunky. He is stout, said Burnell. I guess he has held his glasses in place with a rubber band. There is a fluff to his hair, I suppose. They say he has a very full face. Is his face? It goes with the body. It's chunky, said Burnell. Burnell had plans of getting together with Don and going into business with him. For the time being, Andrews was returning to work in the Bay Area. It was hard to understand how Burnell, as a potential business partner, could not know his friend's new address. Burnell told me Andrews had been developing arthritis since 1969. Was this the reason Zodiac had stopped killing? Would progression of this condition be noticeable by experts in the later Zodiac letters? Don has a prepossessing appearance, said Burnell, and most people wouldn't cotton to him. He seems smug. He's the kind of man who could do anything under any circumstances. He puts every penny into acquiring photo machinery. When I asked Burnell about Don's handwriting, he said, he has a laborious way of working on any sort of writing. He uses felt-tip pens for almost everything. Don Andrews was an intriguing suspect, but I could go no further until I could find him and until I could speak to Narlo about him. Andrews had made an enemy of a woman who worked in the personnel section of the radio station he had worked for, and she got me handprinting samples. But these were not enough for Morell to rule him out or in as a suspect. I learned the identities of the teenage witnesses to the Stein killing and showed them a picture of Don Andrews. They thought he was too old and too fat. I later developed my own doubts that Andrews was the man. Thursday, May 3rd, 1979. At 11:05 p.m., Sergeant Ralph Wilson of Valito called me unexpectedly. It's the weirdest thing, he said. I've been thinking about the Zodiac killer, and right in the middle of checking out records on a cop who once dated Darlene Ferrin, I got a phone call from an unidentified informant who said he's afraid he's going to be murdered. I began to get chills up and down my spine. I knew Sergeant Wilson wouldn't be calling me unless something really was up. This informant figured This informant fingered an ex-roommate who he thinks is going to kill him because he knows the roommate is the Zodiac, continued Wilson. This guy is scared out of his mind. The suspect lived on a ranch. He's moody and expert with weapons, and he's got photos and exhibits of the Farron murder. He's got all the photos of the victims. We now think he was the unidentified man who had the argument with Darlene Farron at the restaurant. He's into the occult. He's into cryptography, and he looks like the composite drawing. He was fired from the sheriff's department, said Wilson. Let me just refer to him as Jack to avoid any problems. As far as I was concerned, Don Andrews was the best suspect in the case, but I wanted to hear every possibility. According to Wilson, access to the roads where the crimes were committed had been a problem during the short time in 1969 when Jack was a prime suspect in Darlene Farron's murder. There seemed to be no way he could get to the murder scenes and back home in the time allowed. Now, thanks to the unknown informant, Sergeant Wilson learned of a small road that opened out on Lake Herman Road. The road was closed by a gate with 3 combination locks. Jack supposedly knew the combinations and used this ranch road to commit his murders and return home. This could explain why Mrs. Borges did not see Zodiac's car when she drove straight into Benicia on narrow Lake Herman Road and flagged down a patrol car. Sergeant Wilson promised to get back to me the minute something broke. He had to wait until the informant called again and let him know who he was. I knew this, Jack, said Wilson. He's capable of anything. Sunday, June 24, 1979, Takashi dragged after a 10-hour work detail, nursing a throbbing ankle. But he had to give a pleased smile when he saw a Sunday Progress article about him. It told how, after not quite a year, he had been reinstated to his former rank. Reminded, he gave a relieved laugh. Now he had worked all the 4 units of crimes against persons: sex, homicide, aggravated assault, and now robbery. He was back on top again. I felt good. At our morning editorial conferences, I had had an opportunity to speak to 2 mayors, Moscone and Feinstein, about promoting him. I would like to think that might have helped. Tuesday, June 26, 1979, I learned that Jack had sold his ranch and used the money to buy a bar in Nevada. To see if he compared physically to Zodiac, I made the trip by car. When I arrived in the evening, he was playing at the second of 2 plush pool tables. He was tall, thin, and bald as an egg. His fingerprints had been checked against the bloody print on Stein's cab and came up negative. The photos he had of Darlene's body at the scene, he admitted he had taken as a souvenir when he left the police department. They were official autopsy and crime scene photos. I was convinced that he was not Zodiac.